This is why I'm going back through. Well, it's why I started going back through with the audiobooks because of the commute. But now I'm going back through because they're fascinating, of course. All right. So one of the things that we talk about a lot in studying fantasy is, gosh, it's this whole other world. And how does somebody even build this world? How do you go about it? And Tolkien kind of, he may
had
have
a
been
big
in,
mind.
He did. And he may have been in the largest and most complex, most complete world of any of them. So if you look at the Wikipedia article on world building, almost all of his examples are from Tolkien because he kind of broke the mold for world building. So it seems to me like it's a good place to start to talk about that. Let's see, how does this work? It doesn't.
Do you point it at the projector or the computer?
I'm trying both. All right. So
At least you're getting it on videotape.
there we go. We'll do it this way then. So just quickly a plan for the day. Step one, I wanted to give you just some background on what Tolkien went and did, and it's a long chronology, and I'm not going to read it all to you. But bear with me, I know I'm kind of a nerd about that. I just want to give you some background, some of the stuff that he did, and we'll skim through it. But I wanted to give you a sense of how many years he had a lifetime into this story. He really did. Then I want to talk a little bit about what he had to say, because for him, it all starts with language. He was a philologist, which is an older term. He's somebody that's a linguist and a study of culture, so languages and culture and how they fit together. That's what he did for a living, and so it makes sense that for him it starts with language. And he said you can't understand a language if you don't understand the history and the culture of the people that speak the language. And so, as he was putting together, first started with one Elvish language, and then it built to several Elvish and a couple.
Yeah,
of
they had
languages.
the Wood Elven and
The ones at Arendelle.
Arendelle, and then they had switched it over to the Undwarven language.
Yep, you are right. There were several of those. I think he ended up with 5. What he called separate languages, and he knew enough to know the difference between a dialect and a language. So I don't know them all, but I'm going to assume they were languages. Hi, come on in. So I wanted to talk about what he had to say about starting from a language and building a world. And he talked about writers of fairy stories and creators of fairy stories. And this ties in a little bit to his Christian religion, but he talked about the creator of a fairy story as a sub-creator within the larger creation of his belief. The author becomes a sub-creator of a whole separate world. And so I want to show you some of the stuff that he wrote about that. He's got a famous essay called On Fairy Stories, where he really lays out a lot of what he believed about the world building. And then I thought we would just talk together about all the things he had to invent and what are some of your favorites, and how must that have been for a writer, for a sub-creator, in putting together a whole world. All right, so chronology, most of this is from the Tolkien Society. They have a giant website called a timeline. It's just a part of their website. If you want to look at it later, it's tolkiensociety.org, and the timeline is on that link there, but you can get to it from anywhere on their website. It's a really, really good resource. I want to hit some high points, and the red things are the really high points, but just notice this date, starting as early as 1914. Tolkien's writing his first identifiable Middle-earth fragment. And then he publishes that Goblin. Y'all remember the Goblin Thief poem from The Hobbit? It's at least in the annotated Hobbit. I'm not sure now if it's in the full text.
Has notes to it.
Mm-hmm.
No.
It's got the whole story, and then it's got little sidebars about stuff that was going on in Tolkien's life, or sources that the thing are from, and some of his other poetry, which is why I'm not sure if Goblin maybe didn't print or not.
And the
Okay.
in the
I know
Fellowship
it
of the
was,
Ring,
yeah.
in the Fellowship of the Ring movie, they had a goblet in the middle, and then it's all
This
circled around.
goblin.
Yep.
Goblin, okay.
You know, and at one point I was really unhappy about the Fellowship of the Ring using the word goblin, because I had gotten it in my head that Hobbit uses goblin, but then in the Lord of the Rings it's orc exclusively for the term, and I was wrong. Going back through it, preparing for this, lo and behold, there's the word goblin, which is interesting because mostly Tolkien made a shift in how he thought about those big baddies, but there apparently are still goblins in the world in Fellowship of the Rings. Told you I was a nerd. I clarified that, right? Okay. So let's see. He's working on just gradually through. through 1917, 1918. Here's a cool thing for the English nerds. He worked on the Oxford English Dictionary as it was being compiled. And probably started the first version of the Music of the Aeneid at that point. But just giving you an idea also of his background in language, he's starting to think about this. When he was a child, he and some of his cousins put together some made-up languages. So he had a background in that even as a kid. But he starts developing expertise, and I think that's important. He reads a version of The Fall of Gondolin to his college essay club in 1920. 22, he's working as a professional philologist, published a Middle English vocabulary, so a sort of a glossary of Middle English words. So he's studying the older English. He studies some of the other languages. He becomes fascinated with Finnish later on, which is interesting. He was sick a lot.
Who is E.B. Gordon? Who is that?
That is another scholar that he was working with and that he worked on. This should be in italics, on Gawain and the Green Knight, which is a medieval Arthurian tale. Turns back to his mythology in 23. This is the first of the Elvish languages here. Started working on it. They think about the summer of 23. He gets married in here, by the way, and begins to get some stability in his life, which I highlight that just because when you've got a steady job and you're not having to scramble to feed yourself, you can spend more time on this kind of stuff, and so I think that kind of matters. So for apparently 1 year, he was appointed as professor of the English language at Leeds University. But then, this is the big deal. His publications apparently were important enough. He gets this at Oxford University. He gets appointed as professor of Anglo-Saxon, and it's a named chair, which is a big deal. It means the funding was there. This stuff matters, right? He obviously felt about it the same way I did. He bought a house at that point. So now he's got a steady job that knows he's going to get paid. He's got a place to live. I think some of the stuff took off there. You know, we don't think about that in an author's life, but gosh, it matters. Just that stability. In May of 26, he meets C.S. Lewis. That becomes a very important friendship, right? These guys bounce ideas off each other. They form a whole little group of writers. Lots of stuff going on there. Lecturing on things in Old English, which is really an entirely different language from the English that we speak. And is the basis for some of the things that he does in the structures of his languages. Farmer Giles, Sketch of the Mythology, there's things that we see in some of the other books that Christopher Tolkien has brought out here later on. About summer of 1930, we think he wrote the first sentence of The Hobbit. You remember that sentence, right? In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit, and then he has to stop. But what is a hobbit? Right? Has to go back and explain that. Starting to build that world for his readers. Right there. Most important first thing you know, there are hobbits and they live in the ground. Anyway. He publishes an essay about inventing private languages, and this is where he really starts talking about you've got to know the people, you've got to know the culture, you've got to know the history, or you can't really understand the language. That kind of thing is the reason why I made high school students, when I taught that, memorize a short section of the prologue to the Canterbury Tales and learn about the people, because if you don't pronounce it, if you don't feel the words, you don't understand it. I think he felt the same way. It's interesting. Okay, a few more years pass, but by early 1936, he's got a partial manuscript of The Hobbit. And he sends it to Susan Dagnall, who's one of the two publishers at Allen & Unwin at that time. That's a publisher. And they did end up publishing the first edition.
Doesn't it make you wonder how did he live for 6 years from 1930 to 36?
No, he got paid by Oxford.
Just writing without, got income before it was even submitted.
But he was a professor.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's why this part's in red. This is important. This gives the steady job.
Oh, okay.
Then a chaired professor.
Right. Until he retired, writing was never his day job. It's very interesting. But he always worked as a professor, stayed at Oxford for a career after that, actually. But yeah, it would otherwise have been very, very difficult.
So he was writing scholarly things,
Yes,
though,
and publishing.
that were not necessarily what in this vein.
They were linguistic,
Yeah,
so in that
yeah.
sense, they were
They
related.
were right.
But yeah, not about this. He did publish a few things about this. That On Fairy Stories will be there. He started. Tolkien was actually an important Anglo-Saxon scholar. I'll get back to this in just a second, I promise. But he was a very important scholar of Anglo-Saxon. He's the person that got people in my field to study Beowulf and to take it seriously. Linguists had always studied Beowulf because it's the single biggest chunk of text in the Old English language that we have. But as literature, no, it was not accepted at all. It had those weird monsters and dragons stuff. That stuff can't be serious, right? And he published a very famous essay called Beowulf, The Monsters and the Critics, defending the whole idea of fantastic literature in the first place. And, persuading people takes a long time, but that was definitely a major first step. And part of that is because he had that named chair at Oxford. He had the respectability to bring to it and say, we need to rethink this. We need to take stuff with monsters in it seriously. Yes,
I
ma'am?
remember studying Beowulf the first time, and it stuck with me all these years.
Yeah.
All these years,
Mm-hmm.
it stuck with me.
And now we don't even think about people wouldn't take that seriously. But it was in the 30s he published that essay, and it was, like I say, linguistically important, but literature not so much. So it's kind of interesting how that happened. All right, I figured you guys would think this was a big deal, right? That's the first edition cover, by the way. And Tolkien drew that. He drew a lot. He drew the illustrations for. There were a bunch of things in that first edition of The Hobbit. He drew really pretty line art.
Was he an artist too, you think?
Yeah,
Based on this, and then on some more detailed stuff in the interior, I would say yes. And stuff in the runic language around the edge. Can y'all see that back there? Yeah.
I didn't hardly see that.
Yeah,
first.
I
I
can't
was
read
watching
it.
the mountains and
I'll have to study more. I don't know what it says. But there it sits because it's important. It frames the whole story. You see that? It's on the back. The back cover has a picture too.
Oh,
And
okay.
and the words go all the way around to frame the whole story. The thing that sets it all off. For
Is
him to
that
start with
Elvish?
language.
You think that's Elven
I
language
think that
or
is
Dwarven?
I think that is probably Elvish because that was the first language that he came
Oh,
up with.
okay.
I think that was central. All right, so 37. Hobbit is published. It's really successful. Stanley Unwin, that's the other publisher at Allen and Unwin, starts urging him to write a sequel. He starts the sequel. It's going to be a while, you guys. This is 37. All right. Little thing called World War II breaks out. Tolkien went to World War I. He was in the trenches. But World War II, he's busy. Remember that day job I mentioned, his university duties. He's an air raid warden, which means that he was in charge of, maybe a neighborhood in the area, making sure that when the air raid sirens went off, people didn't have any lights showing, everybody was quiet. They're trying to make it so that the bombers can't find where to drop the bombs, and that means you don't light stuff up and you don't make noise for them to help find you. And other stuff, but there's a bunch of stuff going. Basically, all of 1943, there's a war happening, and there's college going on, and he didn't have much time to work on it at all. Pretty much didn't get to work on it. That essay on fairy stories is published in 47. That's an important one, and I got some quotes out of that to show you in a little bit, because that's the one where he's talking about how to create. 49, he's got some kind of draft of the Lord of the Rings, the whole thing. What we think of now as 3 books was at this point 1 big, fat, pumpkin fat one. And he starts some negotiations, and that's the editor's name and publisher Collins. In autumn of 49. In 50, he's working with now Sir Stanley Unwin, Allen and Unwin. Remember, they published The Hobbit. Working with them, but he's getting tired of waiting. He wants an answer to the suggestion that the Lord of the Rings and slightly smaller Silmarillion get published together. He thinks they fit together. Yes, sir.
Would you think that book, that big huge book with all 3 books, would you think somebody would still have their
my copies all together.
They did print some and put all 3 together. They weren't originally published that way. They were originally published in.
Do you think somebody
book
would
3.
have the original, or would it be too messed
Oh,
up.
you mean a first edition?
First edition.
Well, the first editions were the 3 books separated. He started negotiating. The negotiation didn't exactly work out until they got
Oh,
split up.
okay. Because
Yeah.
I didn't know
Now-
if they had one big book or
Right.
if they had them separated out.
Right. Now, Tolkien's original manuscript would have been one big.
Would
Manuscript that he
would
wrote- he
they,
wrote
somebody
down.
still have that? or-
Probably Christopher Tolkien, his son.
Oh.
Probably. But I don't know that. That would be a good thing to research, but I don't know it. So he's trying to convince folks to publish Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion together. And then, you know what? Nope, you gotta cut it. It's just too big.
Editors do that.
They do. They do. And this is just, I mean, it's gargantuan. There's a lot of money. There's a lot of risk. Paper costs money. Ink costs money. The sucker's going to be heavy. You don't want to sit here, hold this thing, and try to flip the pages and read. I mean, yes, wouldn't it have been cool to see the whole thing? But this was pre-Kindle. It would have been hard. So, about late in 51, we think that he's writing to Waldman, the fellow at Collins, saying, you know what, these have got to go together. And he's not even arguing about splitting up the Lord of the Rings at this point. He's saying Lord of the Rings and Silmarillion have got to be together. You know, I guess you pick your battles, right? All right. Yeah, Collins says no thank you. Allen and Unwin in 52 decide, yes, we would like to on a profit-sharing basis. It means Tolkien's going to take on some of the risk. That was one of the concerns with something so huge, I think. It is not until fall of 53 that they pick out the subtitles, the Fellowship of the Ring, Two Towers, Return of the King, for the individual volumes of the Lord of the Rings. Tolkien is thinking of it as a single book with volumes. And so I'm going to try to retrain myself to think of it that way rather than thinking of it as 3 different books. But we've gotten so used to seeing physical 3 different books that that's kind of how we think of it, right? But then they come out in fairly quick succession, right? Summer of 54 is Fellowship, fall of 54 is Two Towers, the next fall is Return of the King. So they do eventually get out. But, that's a big, long saga of figuring it out, writing languages, writing background. This is why there are tons and tons and tons and tons of notes out there, because he built a whole world around these, and they're big to begin with. And then you get into the negotiation with the publishers, which is a whole separate saga, right? That's like if writing the world is Fellowship of the Ring and Return of the King, or Fellowship of the Ring and the Two Towers, Return of the King is the whole publishing negotiation thing. It really can be a big deal. So stuff that he said about creating these worlds, he didn't ever really say a whole lot until his letters were published, and we see what he actually wrote to publishers. He didn't say a whole lot about that saga. I think he was too polite. But stuff about this. This is from his letters, but it's talking about specifically his inspiration, the fundamentals of his work. It's all of a piece, that is, it's all one thing. He still wants to emphasize that even after the publication. And it's fundamentally linguistic and inspiration. It all centers on those languages for him, because that's what he did. It's not a hobby in the sense of something quite different from one's work. Dr. Tucker, that gets back to your idea of the scholarly versus the creative work that he did. He thought of it as of a piece, because for him the creative work was also linguistic in nature, right? The stories were made to provide a world for the languages. I think that's interesting. He needed the background for that to come first. A name comes first and the story follows. I like this. I should have preferred to write in Elvish. Man, wouldn't that be cool? Nobody would ever publish that.
It'd be different.
Oh, it would be fun. But of course, such a work as The Lord of the Rings has been edited, and only as much language has been left in as I thought would be stomached by readers. And I now found that many would have liked more Elvish. Yeah, that might be, right? So, what is it all about? His answer sometimes is its linguistic aesthetic. It's all the stuff that the culture that causes a language to happen, that causes a language to change. So for him, yeah, it all starts and ends with the languages, and I think that's why that frame around that first edition. Dr. Tucker.
Okay, I'm trying to. The invention of the language is the foundation. The stories were made rather to provide a world. That seems backward. It seems like if he's saying that the language is tied into the culture, wouldn't the culture in the universe that he creates come first, and the language would come out of that?
Yeah, how do we reconcile that? I think you have to think like a linguist.
Yeah.
Yes, if this were a real world historically, the language would have developed. However, it is that languages spring forth from the unspoken. Nobody knows that, right?
Yeah.
But this whole little world grew in his head from, about the time he was 15 till the day he died, roughly. I think in his mind, the language probably did come first. And only the rudiments of the language, and then you had to figure out, okay, what are the people like? How would they describe this? But if the name comes first, and then you build a story around it, I almost wonder if the whole thing didn't start with a word.
Yeah.
And in English, in England too, there were a lot of stories of elves and
Oh yeah.
fairies and things. So at a young age, he may have been
Inspired by.
inspired
He
by that,
was,
and thinking
almost
like,
certainly.
how would the elves say something or something?
Almost certainly. And he's inspired by English fairy. He's inspired by the Norse stories that he studied. He's inspired by the mythology that
Vikings.
surrounded things like Beowulf.
Yeah, the rooms and everything.
And hobbits, dwarven.
Yeah, there were dwarves in the Norse mythology.
Hobbits are all his, though, right?
Yeah.
Hobbits are his,
Yeah, the hobbits
Oh,
were
okay.
his. The hobbits were his.
And-
totally.
but the others are not. Yes, ma'am.
And well, when I first read it, I thought, well, the hobbits are people. They're just little people. And I realized, no, the hobbits are a
Exactly.
different race.
Yeah.
They're not a different ethnicity. They're a different species.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are.
And the elves are a different species, and the dwarfs are a different species. And that was like, oh, okay.
They're,
And the Balrog's a different species.
the Balrog is a something. Yes, you're right.
And Smoug's a different
Yeah, it's not the
something.
same kind of creature as any other creature.
Yeah.
Yes, you're
But the
absolutely right about
the
that.
men are a species, and there are different races or ethnicities of men. Which, when I read that, I thought that he was tying those into certain European and even Middle Eastern groups.
And he's always denied that.
Really?
People
Okay.
see a lot of World War II in
Yeah.
this, and he's always said, how did he put it? Coincidence is not causation, or something like
Yeah,
that. That's
yeah.
not quite right. Yes, of course, it influenced me. I lived through it, and it influenced you, so you see it in the things that are right. But looking at the history, he really did have a whole bunch of that stuff laid out long before.
Yeah, before.
Some of it before
Two,
World
yeah.
War One.
So he wasn't really saying Sauron was Hitler or
No,
anything like that.
no. He would have argued no.
I never
Yeah.
saw that reading.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, is that
you
because
can
I'm further away from World War
think
II?
of the Shire as England, and you can start to see a lot of it. But
Maybe that's it. We're like you said, we were further away
Yeah,
from
maybe.
it when we first read it.
Maybe.
So didn't really draw that.
and we published in the early 50s. People are just getting over that, or not yet getting over that. They're going to see it everywhere.
Well, like I saw Erwin and her family, and I forgot what they're called. What that thing?
The Rohan,
The
Riders of
Ronin.
Rohan.
I see them as Scandinavian.
Yeah.
You know, and it seems
And
like
he
Jackson
describes them
took
as
that
very
as
tall and blonde hair.
yeah.
Yeah.
It seems like Jackson took the same
Yep.
approach too,
Yep.
because it
Yep.
seems very Scandinavian.
Yeah, but it's all very interesting. But I wanted to bring this to you. We could have talked about mythology of England, mythology of the Norse stuff. We could have talked about Midgard, which is Middle Earth. There's so many pieces to this. So I went back to what he said and said, okay, he said it started with language. We gotta pick. We can't do it all. So the languages, but then all the other stuff follows from it. Let me show you just a little bit more of what he said, and then let's
Do you think people jumped to the conclusion that it had references to the war because of, like Frank Baum, the Wizard of Oz, how they compared the gold standard, the Russian, they had all that
you're right.
symbolism.
Yeah.
They just assumed that since one writer did that, maybe other writers did
Well,
that
it
too.
could be. It could be. I had not thought about it being because of other writers doing that. And I'm not saying that it's not there. because I won't necessarily just blindly agree with a writer if he says, "Oh no, that's not in there." Well, maybe some of it snuck in there without you noticing. But I also do think that timeline gives a fair bit of credence to that. You know, some of it may have snuck in there as extra decoration, but I think the heart of it he already had developed before the war broke out. It makes it kind of hard to say it's all just the war. There's more also. Yes,
And
sir.
there's one more thing. You think like Mordor, and I don't know if we're gonna bring this up. Mordor is sort of like the different like cities, or you could put like countries. There's Mordor, is it Rivendell?
Rivendell's there.
Rivendell, and you think the White City and a bunch of them. You could put them like countries.
Yes, absolutely.
You
Yes,
could. We could go on a whole different discussion.
That's actually one of the slides here. One of the other things
Oh,
he
okay.
invented is geography. And he drew the maps in the first editions
Oh.
with his own hand, so that's kind of cool. But there's just so much to this. This is a world almost as complete as our. What do the writers of Rohan say? As this world where we walk on the green grass under the bright sun of today. There's almost as much to it as that world, as this world.
I think they made that in New Zealand, didn't they?
They made the films in New Zealand. They surely did. They surely did. Yeah. Let's see. What do we need out of here? Okay, so this is from his essay on fairy stories. And he's talking about how much there is here, right? The realm of fairy story is wide and deep and high and filled with many things, beasts and birds and shoreless seas and stars. He invented the constellations in his invented world, you guys. So, in that realm, a man may perhaps count himself fortunate to have wandered, but its very richness and strangeness tie the tongue of a traveler who would report to them. He couldn't begin to get it all out, is what he's saying here. How much more was in his head that never got written down? A whole bunch of it got written down, a lot more than is in
You know,
just the
some of
books.
the English,
Mhm.
British mythology, if you wandered into the land of fairy,
Yes.
you may never find your way out.
Yes, absolutely.
Particularly if you ate something.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Mm-hmm. That's in Greek mythology as well. But
Yeah, and
Yeah.
if you did find your way out,
Mhm.
it may have seemed like 2 or 3
Eternity.
days to you,
Uh-huh.
and yet it may
4
have
or
been
5 years.
10 years.
I know. You wake up and everybody you know is died old age.
Mm.
What's that? Rumpelstiltskin? All right. And this follows shortly after that verse, but language cannot all the same be dismissed. The incarnate time, the tongue, and the tale are in our world co-equal. They're equal. The mind, the story, but also the language that's used to tell the story. So for him, I mean, it's what he did, right? He was a linguist who studied languages for a living, so of course he's going to put it at the heart of his stuff. But I just think it's cool. The human mind sees not only green grass, discriminating it from other things and finding it fair to look upon, but sees that it is green as well as being grass. How powerful, how stimulating to the very faculty that produced it was the invention of the adjective. No spell or incantation in fairy is more potent than the adjective. It's kind of a silly example, but the example that linguists often use in just talking about the power of language to influence how we see the world is they'll bring up certain Eskimo groups that have, I think it's 42 supposedly words for snow that each describe a different kind of snow.
Wow.
And I know some of my friends, is anybody in here from the north? Okay, with apologies, some of my Yankee friends will talk about kinds of snow, and I'm going, okay, what's that? And I guess they use adjectives. But for me, snow is this weird thing that happens about once every couple of years, and it sits around on the ground. About that much of it sits on the ground for a little while. And I don't have a lot of words to describe different kinds of snow. And so often I don't have a way to imagine different kinds and textures of snow, let alone 42 of them, right? I don't have that category in my brain because my language doesn't use it. That's a little bit of what he's getting at here. Language does affect how we think and how we see the world. And so that's kind of a silly example, but I do like his idea of green. I could say green and communicate to all of y'all something in particular, but I've got a color of green here on my shirt, and Dr. Tucker's got a different color, and Misty's got a different color back there. we could start describing them. We could start putting in more in there. But if we had words that describe those as different colors, if we had lots and lots and lots of words for the different shades of color, we'd probably see the world differently, right? It's just kind of interesting to think about.
But we couldn't describe them without those adjectives.
We couldn't. Could we get by with fewer colors than we have, I wonder? It's hard to think about, isn't it? But here, I'll read you out. I believe it is Japanese. Don't sue me if I got my wrong language, but I believe it is Japanese that actually doesn't have two separate words for blue and for green. And so it's kind of just a sliding scale, right? But, what color's the carpet? Is it blue or is it green? It's mostly blue, but it's got some greenish in it, right?
Bluish white.
And some white too, you're right. I could see how that could totally work with kind of a sliding scale there, right?
Yeah.
And then if you don't have a word to distinguish it, do you care? And if you don't care, do you look that closely, right? It's just a silly example, but how powerful is the adjective, right? It forms the way we think. If you stop to think about it, or other words too. Anyway, it's why he's so fascinated with language. And I guess you figured out by now I kind of am too. All right, let's see. All right. So every writer making a secondary world is a sub-creator, he says. And this ties back to Tolkien's own Christian faith. He thinks of this world as made by a big C creator, right? So a fantasy writer making a world within it, and it's within it even if it's a whole separate world because the books exist in this world, right? A sub-creator. And for him, that's cool. This is in some measure they wish to be a real maker or hope that they're drawing some of reality. Hoping that their qualities of their little world are derived from reality. But inner consistency of reality. This is what he really needs. The world that you create has got to be consistent in and of itself, right? Everything has to fit one way or another. A sudden glimpse of the underlying reality or truth of a story that's consistent in and of itself. He says that's the joy of fantasy. Oh, that makes sense. Oh yeah, if there's magic in this world, yes, it makes sense that Gandalf's got a bunch of it. He can make cool fireworks, and he can more or less defeat a Balrog. Right? he can fight a Balrog to a standstill at least, right? and then he's the one that climbs back up.
You shall not pass.
Right, yeah.
I love that line.
Balrog didn't pass, but Gandalf didn't get to right away either. So. Yeah. Yes.
There's a line
Yes,
in the movies. It's at the end of. Samwise says it at the end of the set of Two Towers, but in the books, I think it's in the beginning of the third one, where Samwise talks about the stories that matter.
Yes.
I love that
Yes.
line.
Yes.
Yeah, the real stories
Stories
that matter.
yes.
And I think that's Tolkien basically saying this
It is.
in that.
I think you're right. Tolkien has a lot to say about storytelling in the stories.
Mhm.
Most of it's done in song, which is, again, back to the Anglo-Saxon and Norse tradition of the traveling bards. The history is carried through the songs. But there's a lot to be said about it. Bilbo's important because he writes stories and he writes songs. And he's important for other reasons, don't get me wrong, but that's one of them, right? And Frodo is important, but Sam starts really coming into his own. About the time they get back to the trolls. Remember the trolls in The Hobbit that returned to stone? When Frodo and the dwarves encountered them and they fool them. About the time that the hobbits get there, Sam starts making his own songs. It's a little silly song about trolls gnawing on old bones, for starters. But he starts coming into his own. It's kind of cool seeing that. He's
that in
becoming
the
a
book?
sub-creator.
Is
Yeah.
that in the book?
It is
or
in the
is
book,
it
and I don't know if it's in the
I don't
movies
think
or
it's
not. I
in the
don't
movie.
remember.
It's not in the movie, I don't think.
Okay.
That's in. Have you seen the Hobbit movie?
I'm not. Which one?
The Hobbit.
Okay, I've seen the first one. Have we seen
You haven't seen The Hobbit.
the first one?
No,
I've
The
seen-
Hobbit came before the three.
It's about Frodo's uncle Bilbo.
Bilbo.
Okay, I think I've seen the Hobbit.
Have you?
Yeah, I've seen the first one. I've seen the second one, but not the third one.
Okay, okay. You would like all the movies. I think you'd really like the audiobooks too. They're kind of cool.
Okay.
Because there's just no time in a movie that's got to be 2 or 3 hours to do all this stuff. I mean,
Well,
Yeah.
that's what I was gonna say.
Yeah.
They cut my favorite character
Aw.
from the movies, and it's,
Yeah.
I can't remember Tom
Bombadil.
Yeah.
Bombadil.
Yes,
yes.
they did.
And he is nothing but a bard who speaks in songs.
I know.
And-
I know. I don't want to talk about it.
And I think you have to make sure that it's unabridged on audio, because some of them aren't. And if you want to
That's
get word
good to
for
know.
word.
What do you mean on a bridge?
They haven't
Word for
taken
word.
anything out.
Oh, okay.
Exactly.
Sometimes they take out words to make it shorter. If it's not 15 or 16 CDs, they took some out.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
For each of the 3 volumes.
Okay.
And the neat part is that people think, when I used to do that I was cheating. I said, not if it's unabridged, I'm reading every single word of the book, plus the added noise.
Well,
Like the
that's true.
streetcars, ambulance, all those noises of birds at night and stuff. It just adds to it.
Yeah, it becomes an interpretation in some ways because they do add that. It becomes a performance. But like the version that I'm listening to now, which I do because I have a 45-minute drive, so it gives me lots of uninterrupted time. The gentleman who's reading it, he's got only a slight British accent, but enough. And he sings the songs, which could have been horrible, but he can sing it, so it works well, right? So, but there's an interpretation too, because I don't know what melody Tolkien intended the songs to have, but so far so good it's worked, right? So it's very interesting that, and hearing them again, and not having read all 3 of them in quite a while. It's been fun. All right, so that was really the end of my wanting to show you what Tolkien had to say. I thought we'd talk about. What do you want to talk about? Let me show you what all I've got here, and y'all tell me if I've left anything out. All the things Tolkien invented. The languages, definitely, right? What else do we have? The culture, and so some of that is poetry, some of that is the creators in there. And this is the song that comes up over and over again, the Roads Go song. Bilbo has a version, Frodo has a different version. Turns up in several places. Under cloud and star. This, I think, is Bilbo's version at the end of The Hobbit as he's coming back home. The history. Did y'all know all of these books existed? These are some of the notes and things that Christopher Tolkien has been publishing. We've got the Book of Lost Tales, which I think was published in Tolkien's lifetime, the first one here. But then this is Book of Lost Tales Part 2.
So his son is a writer too?
His son is publishing things of his. I don't know, and I don't know if anybody knows if he's adding to it. I know he's polishing them and kind of putting them together a little more. I don't know if he would call himself a writer or call himself an editor of those. Certainly his credit on the publications is as editor. You see J.R.R. Tolkien's listed on all of these.
Yeah.
But he's taking stuff that his father left behind and putting it together and cleaning it up, and there's a lot of it.
Is that all same thing? Book of Lost Tales, or are all?
No,
different?
not all of this Book of Lost Tales. That third one is The Laws of Briand. I can't pronounce
I
Tolkien's
can't
words.
see
if I
it
don't
good.
know.
I can
yeah,
see it.
I thought I'd read them too. The fourth one is that purple one is Shaping a Middle Earth. And then we got The Lost Road and Other Writings, The Return of the Shadow, The Treason of Isengard. I have not read that one, and I want to. Oh, I see that. Yeah. This was The Treason of Isengard. This was The War of the Ring. Sauron defeated Morgoth's ring, The War of the Jewels, and The Peoples of Middle Earth.
You know, the Shaping of Isengard, or
The Treason of Isengard, yeah.
and the one Shaping of Middle Earth might be good.
But you're saying these are more notes, they're not finished finished novels?
I think it varies what state they're in. Have you read any of the Silmarillion, Barbara?
No, I haven't gotten to that one.
It's got long chunks of narrative, and sometimes stops at an unfinished point and goes to something different. It all kind of ties back together, and it really gives you a lot of the background. It's the mythos. It's the overarching story of how all of this happened. We're in the third age of Middle Earth in The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, and it tells the tale of how the first ages happened, and the creator in this world and the different races that came before. And it's interesting, but it is mythos, and some of it is fragmentary. Not all of it. These I don't know as well. I've read this, but God, it's been at least 20 years. I don't remember. I'm sorry. It may be a series of tales. But anyway, history, culture. Good Lord, there's tons of it, right? And of course the geography. And then I think it's just, Tolkien himself. Well, what did I leave out? What else did he create? Or what do y'all want to talk about? Because there's so much. There's no way we can talk about it all.
Did he create the languages first as written and then as spoken? And that's backwards too.
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I assume that he wrote them down at some point, but how long have they been going through his head? I don't know.
Yeah.
And I've not, his letters are published also, and I've not read hardly any of his letters, so he may talk about that more there. I love reading authors' letters, you guys. If you've never had a chance to read we're going to lose that now because people don't write letters anymore. But Tolkien, he didn't have any internet, so he wrote down on paper
And no
sent it to
text
people.
or anything.
Yeah.
And
So it's just fascinating to see the insight into their day-to-day lives there.
I can't imagine the geographic stuff he created and everything just by his mind.
Yep. And he drew some of it. I just found it.
Do you know at what point he drew that map? Was that like
I'm
to me?
not-
I would need that map drawn before I could write
Yeah,
about it.
yeah.
Yeah, and I
I would say
don't
so.
know. I am not positive that this is one of his, although these mountains look like the way he drew mountains, so it might be.
But
I found a map of Middle Earth on the internet.
I was
But-
just
It's
curious.
not that
I
much,
didn't
but
know.
I think this may be one of his because that looks like the way he drew mountains.
But you also got to think about he was an aviator, or was it an aviator? He's a veteran, you remember?
Yes, he was a veteran, but
And he was a warden, you remember? So he had to learn his maps.
Yes, he probably did. You're right.
So you got to think about that. So the maps part probably come in handy on that.
You think about too, I was thinking about, he created this whole, I mean, Rowling created her world within the confines of
Yeah.
Oh,
Hogwarts.
yes, you're right.
And it's slipping in and out of modern
Modern England.
and Hogwarts. So her world was more confined.
And it's parallel to ours, so she already had the basics
Yeah.
laid out.
Where
Yeah.
he created,
A whole other thing, so we had to start from
Whole
scratch,
other universe, yeah.
even from the languages. There you go. Well, they get left the languages for a while. But yeah, back to what you were saying about him in the war. It had not occurred to me, but you're right. He was a lieutenant, so he was in charge of when he went in. He actually scandalized his family by not volunteering the very day war was declared. He finished his degree first, and they were not sure that was okay because it was there was a lot of patriotism. Go volunteer right away. But he finished his degree, and then volunteered and went in as a lieutenant. So he was in charge of a small group of men, which made him very uncomfortable. He said nobody's good at bossing people, at least of all people that want to, which I thought was very funny.
the trench warfare then.
Yeah.
That
It's bad, but he would have been the guy with the maps
he would have been.
because he
right.
was the officer. Yeah, so he would have learned. If he didn't know how to read them well to begin with, he would have learned fast because otherwise he's going to get his guys killed. It's interesting.
One thing I like about, not geography, but the culture, I love the meals the hobbits have.
It's 11 seasons.
That's your second breakfast.
breakfast,
Breakfast,
11
second
seasons.
breakfast, 11/7 is luncheon. Then we have there's tea and something before tea.
I
Before
love
tea,
meals, yeah.
and then supper, and then they have something.
Like a bedtime snack,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah.
And I liked in the first Hobbit in the movie where all the dwarves came to the Bilbo's house and started throwing on the plates around and singing and stuff.
Singing,
That was
singing.
actually pretty funny.
There was. Tolkien wrote that song, so you have seen The Hobbit.
I have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he did write that song. It's in the book.
I found it interesting that he made his elves so different from other mythical elves. And, you know, you think of elves as being the tiny creatures, and he made his like long
Tall.
and slender
He's got-
and athletic and, yeah.
Orlando Bloom.
Long hair.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, you're right. There's just
They
so
were
much.
almost like the perfect people.
Almost, and they were one of the elder races. And you get into that Cimmerillion. They've been around for.
Species.
He called them races,
Did
but
he
yes,
call them races?
but you're right. They're not races of humans. They're
Yeah.
not. Well, it doesn't even seem like it's right because it's a whole different world. But they're not Homo sapiens. I guess.
Yeah.
If they were here, they would not be.
Because
Homo- they'd
there
be
were
something
men.
different. Yeah.
There were
Yeah,
men,
there were.
and then there's other
Yeah, there were.
things, so.
You're absolutely right.
And I still don't understand the boat thing at the end of, what's it, Return of the King, where the girl and the guy of
They were-
Rivendell,
The Rivendell was falling, and they were going to
the shore thing, where,
They were
The
going
elves
to the
are
west.
passing into another world. Their time on Middle Earth is
Okay.
passing as
I
we see that happening through, especially the Fellowship,
Okay.
and across the sea is.
And that
I
goes
think
back to
metaphor,
that goes
but
back
I'm
to
not
our-
sure because it's Tolkien's world. I don't know.
That goes back
They
to
go
our
into another
Arthurian
world.
legend too. The Avalon faded
Yes.
into the mist.
Yes, it does.
When the Christian world finally overtook it, it just faded into the mist.
So Elven was the first he created. But
One of the several elven.
well, I was
languages
just
created
thinking
by
because
Christians.
then the stories revolve around hobbits,
Yeah.
but the elves were.
And the hobbits don't seem to have a separate language. The hobbits seem to speak English. Or the common tongue is what he calls it in the books a lot.
Right.
Yeah.
dwarves kind of spoke English some.
But they do have their
They
own
had two
language.
different
They-
languages.
English was the
really.
common language.
Yeah, they have their own language also, and they have different names for, like Khazak-dûn.
And
That's a word in
Gimli,
Dwarvish.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I like the Gimli.
yeah. Very interesting. Let's see how we're doing on time. Y'all excuse me while we do that. Oops. We have a few more minutes. So what else do you want to talk about, guys? Did I leave something important out here?
Sauron. Sauron was actually different. Wasn't he the White Wizard before?
Saruman.
Saruman was the
sorry.
White Wizard before he
Sauron was
turned bad. Gandalf becomes the White Wizard, and there's stuff in the Silmarillion and some of the other
Yeah,
things about this group of wizards. They are also another species. A little spoiler there.
Yeah. If anybody hadn't seen it.
Well,
They've had to be
I've
played
not
by
read
humans in the
Silmarillion.
movie.
I need to
Right.
read it.
That's what's confusing us.
And of course, you've got Gollum.
you do.
Gollum.
Who-
Wasn't he Bilbo Baggins at one
No,
time?
he
No,
was.
he
He was a
He was a
hobbit.
river. No,
He was
He
also
was a river
something very
people.
Hobbit-like,
He was a river
at least.
person.
Yes, yes,
Very similar.
he was
Yes.
a different species.
maybe, or maybe an ancestor of hobbits.
And we
I'm
got
not
the-
sure we ever get that fully clear.
They say closely related.
We got the orcs, orcai that was actually elven. I researched that, and they made them from elves turned into orcs. I researched that. It was really interesting.
There's some stuff in the Silmarillion about that too. Yes.
I researched that.
The people on your websites have probably read the Silmarillion. There's some stuff about that. It's very interesting, and there are definitely two strains of orcs at least too. We see that.
Orcai and orcs.
Smog was always one of my favorites.
The dragon. And,
Dragon.
Yes. Sorry, it took me a minute. It's like that's not wait.
He
Oh,
he was
Hobbit.
in. He was in the
Yeah.
two Hobbit movies.
Yeah,
The Five Armies.
I kind of like him.
Oh, that's right. They did the Hobbit. It's more than one movie. I
Yeah,
had
they
forgotten.
did.
There's three of
Three
them.
of them.
Okay, I had forgotten that. Yep.
I didn't think it was this world.
So you can get more money out
Yeah,
of it. Well, I mean,
and it
Well-
was, it just wasn't as well done.
yeah.
Either.
Yeah, it was very
It
pretty.
has a, it's, yeah, it's okay.
Where did you get your tapes
Um,
or DVDs?
I don't think I have the DVDs.
So you're listening to them in the car.
I am on those audio tapes. I did check them out at the public library.
The one here, the Pines.
No, let's see, where did I get? One came from Lafayette and one came from Somerville because I live over there.
Oh, they both have Pines.
Yes, they're
It's
Pines.
interconnected,
Yes,
okay.
they're Pines. They often Pines won't ship.
They
audio
don't, they don't
back
have,
and
that's why I was
forth.
wondering, if they don't have it at this one, and they will not send them anymore.
They
You have
usually
to,
got CDs often. they
you have
won't.
to drive to Somerville or to Lafayette to get it.
Would they
And
have,
I've not checked, but I will tell you that the Dalton Public Library has probably the biggest collection of audio books of any of them that I've encountered. I would be surprised if they didn't have it, but I haven't checked.
Where did you get yours on?
Like I say, I got I got Fellowship of the King from one and Two Towers from the other, and I haven't tried yet for the third one. So
Where-
Somerville and Lafayette.
You drove
One
there
came from
to get
one. I live in Tryon, which is halfway in between
Oh,
the
okay.
two. So for me, it was closer.
would they get
closest to
them
home,
from
so that's why I went.
Amazon? Could you get them from Amazon?
You could if you wanted to.
I'm not sure about audiobooks, but I found Calhoun Library, Calhoun, Gordon County.
Yep.
They're
We're in
very,
the library. Let's see.
they're very good.
All right. What do y'all want to? Which one do y'all want to see? Looks like I should have just clicked on catalog. Oh, look.
Pines, is
Yeah,
that a
Pines
library?
is the public
That's the
library
public library
system in the
Oh,
state.
okay.
And all of these green counties are Pines libraries, so there are a lot of them. Some of the
Oh,
white,
wow.
white colored
When you
ones
get
that
your
are around the
card,
system.
little thing will say
Let's
George
see.
Pines.
Oh,
Okay.
Fellowship first.
Fellowship, yeah. Yes, ma'am.
This is library business, right?
Yes, ma'am.
There's a copy back at, it was Somerville, there's a copy back at Somerville because I just turned it back in yesterday. And I want to limit it to.
How long do we get to keep them?
It's a 2-week checkout, and if nobody else wants it, you can renew it for
For
2 more weeks, and then 1 more time for 2 more weeks, and then you have to turn it back in.
Oh, okay.
Let's
CD
see.
audiobook.
But if somebody else puts their name in the waiting list, you have to turn it back right away.
Yes.
I think you spelled ring wrong, so I don't know.
Yeah,
I
can't
did.
say
There
that.
is an excessive number of eyes in there. Thank you. All right, so this is going to show within all Pines
The rest
libraries,
is
which is
wrong,
kind of
that's all
cool.
I know.
Oh.
There we
Oh,
go.
wow.
Now,
Well,
it says there are 10 out of 15 copies available at Pines, so 15 different libraries have it. Athens, Lafayette,
How about Fort Oglethorpe?
Clarksville, oh, that's northeast. Here, northwest, Dalton does have it. Dalton has
Yes,
two
available
copies.
2
Has
copies,
2
that all.
copies. So y'all don't all fight over it at once. But there's enough for 2 people. And there are a few more. Where else is nearby?
How many is in a,
Fort Oglethorpe
How many is
sometimes
in
has a
copy?
good.
Fort Oglethorpe has some too?
Yeah.
Good.
how many is in a copy? Do you know?
She said they were.
Oh, it's listed as Catoosa County up there.
12 or 13
Yeah,
or
Catoosa's
14.
Fort Oglethorpe.
A bunch of them. A
Okay.
bunch of CDs, and it's in a thick
They were
little
nice.
binder thing.
Oh, okay.
But I mean, if you have a commute or just it's not cheating. As an English professor, I would like to say I would like you to read the words on paper or something as well. But if you get an unabridged version, you're getting all the words. So, anyways, it's an interesting format. It's been great for me prepping for this to review them while I'm driving. Anyway.
Yeah, because you can't read and drive.
It probably wouldn't work as well as we would
No,
like it to.
especially with text and too.
And if you want to read the books on paper now, there are tons and tons and tons of these available, of course. Lots of different editions, but pretty much any library that you go to is going to have a copy as long as it's not checked out. How many
You
different
need your own
versions
copy
are
though.
there?
You probably get one on Amazon for a
Yeah,
penny.
yeah, you probably could too. But there are 102 different versions of it out there in the public libraries as well, and probably a copy on the shelves here. Maybe a couple. Other things? What did you expect to talk about when you came in here? What were you wanting to talk about when you came here? Okay. And if you have to go to class, please go. We have 5 minutes if there's anything else. And if not, I'll say thank you.
One thing I didn't
Yes, ma'am.
realize, and I definitely did not realize, was that, I think, when I think about a writer building a world, I think that they start with an idea for that world. And I didn't realize that his started with the language.
It's really interesting, and I think you're probably right about most writers. Probably start either with an idea about a world, or I've heard a lot of writers or read a lot of writers saying they start with a character in mind.
and develop the world around the character.
And sometimes some of them, are if they're very visual thinkers, they'll have a scene, they'll have a thing, sort of a climactic moment in mind and build around that. But often you hear the whole world or a character. But for Tolkien, language was his thing. It's what he studied. It's what he did. For him, it was at the heart of it. And I think it's really interesting because how do we tell stories with language? So I think it's kind of a cool way to start.
And I think about Klingon being developed.
Yeah.
I mean,
And it's a whole language.
from a couple of characters, they developed the whole culture and language.
Yep, you're absolutely right. There's apparently a very good production of Hamlet in Klingon.
Oh, is it? Well, I love the operas too.
Yeah,
those are pretty.
yeah. But so this thing continued. He started earlier than 1914, but we know first piece written down about 1914. Publication in the early 50s. And he was still doing stuff with it. And so much stuff he never got finished and never got published. And now, Christopher Tolkien is trying to get some of it edited enough to be out there. It's not complete, and it'll never be complete because Tolkien himself didn't get the chance. But we're talking about a work of, 50 years of constant world developing.
And
we still
he
love
was
it.
such friends with C.S. Lewis and the world he was creating.
Yeah.
I mean, Narnia.
They had to have bounced ideas off of each other. Wouldn't you
Narnia was big too.
Oh, yeah. Wouldn't you love to be a fly on the wall in just a couple of those meetings?
Have a little fly that has a camera on it.
Oh, yeah.
Is your brother a teacher?
My brother is a web programmer.
Oh.
I hope I got
So
that
he's going to
right.
put that on the World Wide
Yeah,
Web?
I'm sorry if I got that wrong. He does things with computers that I don't fully understand, and he does them very well.
But now, to me, in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe,
Yeah.
I see more Christian, with a Christian influence.
I think
It's
so.
supposed to be more
Aslan.
like Christian
Yeah, I think
influence,
so.
Aslan sacrificing himself
Yeah.
and everything, you just get more of that.
Yeah. Lion and the Witch and the Wardrobe is straight allegory. With Tolkien, it's more complicated.
Yeah.
But I do think that his religion played a part in how he thought about making his world. So it's really interesting to see.
And you see a lot of magic at the beginning through the end in Lord of the Rings too. So I liked it because it was actually, I could understand it and everything, and it's something that I really could get a grip and actually understand what was going on, even when I was young and everything. Even though I got obsessed with it and had to get, when I was probably 5 or 6, sis,
Probably.
and I had to get the Legos of it. So
I didn't even know there were Legos now.
Oh, yeah, there were Legos.
Well,
yeah, they was Legos.
Of all
I mean, all of
There's
them.
Legos
Well,
for
there-
everything.
Lego has Legos.
Yes.
Okay. Y'all, thank you so much for coming. I really enjoyed it.
Betsy, what's the movie tomorrow night? Are there more about Ian?
I've had Star Wars in it.
Yes,
No,
there is.
I've heard
because they
people talk
just
about
barely
Wednesday nights out here.
stick
Or
their
Thursday
heads
night, I
in
missed them.
to-
Is
I
it
hate
Star Wars
this.
tomorrow night?
Well,
They can't
in
tell,
the
but
books,
there's hints.
there's quite a bit of
There it is.